welcome everyone. It's so lovely to see some familiar faces. It's so lovely to see some new faces as well. Just so grateful for everybody that's going to be spending the time, the very, very valuable, very, very precious time, listening to what Derek has to say tonight, and hopefully participating in a really, um, you know, potentially challenging, very meaningful, very thought-provoking discussion after his presentation, because I think this is a topic that is very much under-discussed, as I'm sure Derek will make very clear to us, really, really highlight. But I think hopefully just us taking this time to discuss it, to be confronting it, to be present with it is, you know, contributing to maybe some important changes. We never know where it will go, but either way, very, very grateful for absolutely everybody that is watching this live and that will be watching this in the future. So I will very briefly introduce Derek, and then I will invite him to introduce himself to see if I've missed anything or if he'd like to add anything. Derek is a friend of mine, a colleague of mine. He is a very experienced private practitioner. He also opened his own treatment in rehabilitation treatment facility, and he has a very long background in addiction treatment as well. But today he's here to speak about his research, which he's been conducting for his doctorate. And so I think there's so much to say on this, but in this moment, Derek, I'm gonna leave it with you.
Yeah.
And welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks everybody for attending. I am anxious, which I think in a nice way. This is the second opportunity I've got to speak about or talk to the presentation that I've put together as a result of my research. And no doubt as I go on, it's going to change because I'm reading more stuff that really links into what my research is about. I think Natalie's covered everything. I've been working as a counsellor psychotherapist since 2016, and in 2014 I set up as Natalie was saying, a quasi-residential treatment centre over in Stoke Newington, which housed 6 individuals that slept there and 6 that came in the day, which is why it was called a quasi. And that was for people caught in addiction, prison, and homelessness. And in 2016, I left because I thought at that point in time, and I think I could be quite, what's the word? I don't follow the sheep that easy. And I suppose that's really come out in terms of my research. As silenced as I felt at the time, I think as time's gone on, so I'm in the 5th year of my doctoral studies. I found my vocal cords, and I don't mean to say this or somehow diminish what happened in May 2020, but I can really get that sense of that proverbial knee being on my neck within training, all my training. And so as time's gone on, that knee's come off. And you'll see what I mean by that. So yeah, I suppose, and I've got a little bit more time, which is good because I delivered this. I think it was on Monday, and I only had a half hour, so I'll go through this, and and I welcome any discussions right at the end, and I'll attempt to answer any of that and any questions that you come up with. And if I don't have the answers, I don't feel no way in saying I don't know. Yeah, so should I start with the presentation? Okay, let me. Okay. This out of the way. Got this. There it is. So on silence, this is something, as my friend Natalie spoke about earlier on, that myself, Natalie, and Amy have come up with this. You know, we meet every weekend and we talk about, I suppose, as I was saying, unsilencing, you know, about our experiences. And so we come up with that, and I like this logo. So this presentation is from Behind the Veil, an Africana critical race framework, unveiling the experiences of Black British-born males of African heritage in psychotherapy training within a white-dominated culture. So I want to start with a clip first before I go into it really introducing. So let me start with this. Black existentialism differs from European existentialism in that it considers the impact of historical dehumanization and enslavement on the identity and meaning of being human of Africana diaspora people. And I want to say this again because I get a chance to speak to this, is that even looking at or watching that clip, I somehow think there's a tendency to separate, which, you know, is a age-old strategy to separate and divide Black people. So we talk about American history as they do, as they spoke on that clip, but that is a Black Africana or Black African people's history. And, you know, so I just want to say that, and this is why it differs. So although these two approaches would ask the same question from different social or economic historical locations, such as what is a human being and what does it mean to be human, it would be a very different question if you have been enslaved, dehumanized historically as a subject of anti-Black racism. So I love this quote from Smith. And she says, from the vantage point, which I'm also saying as well, of the colonized, a position from which I write and choose to privilege, the term research itself is inextricably linked to European imperialism and colonialism. The word itself, research, is probably one of the dirtiest words in the indigenous world's vocabulary. So there was always the unknown, but there's also the knowing blocked by other knowing, and a knowledge that remains hidden given white interests and agendas. Curriculum and pedagogy, insinuated with epistemologies of ignorance, have the potential to be like a God trick, you know, with its dazzling and blinding illumination. So a little bit about me. So as a black male doctoral student and researcher, I've navigated the challenges of what some would like to call microaggressions, which is a palatable word term for racism, in my counselling and psychotherapy training. My journey has been influenced by Black Africana thinkers and the decolonial activists, neither of which I was inspired by the university or colleges I attended. I came across these authors by accident. And I think this is really important, you know, because still, whether they're since 2020, some of the, some institutions are now putting, you know, and again, I think it's quite tokenistic. They're putting, you know, Black authors within the, you know, the recommended reading list or required reading list. It's still quite, I suppose, as I will talk later on, and when I talk about interest, it's what critical race theorists would call interest convergence, you know, and so I think since the murder of George Floyd, it became, you know, that interest convergence, that being in vogue, people being reactive, that's what's happened. And so yeah, as I say, I came across those by accident. So my whole journey on reflection has been one of a racial battle with both white tutors and peers alike. The prevailing Western dominance in education, for me, has highlighted the colonial matrix of power, emphasizing the need for decoloniality or decolonizing, I suppose, not just the curriculum, but looking at the whole spectrum of the training, whether it's from what it costs to being accepted, to who's delivering and how it's being delivered, the training, to working with clients, the whole spectrum, whether it's research supervisors, supervision, therapists, the whole thing. So operating from a critical realist stance, I assert that while reality is independent, our perceptions are molded by our experiences within the socio-cultural context. This perspective, rooted in my experiences and challenges in a predominantly white academic landscape, drives my commitment to spotlighting the often silenced authors and the experiences of my participants, 8 in total. So here's an interesting notion. Let me come to this. Where is it? So the top there, it says, the black man has no ontological resistance in the eyes of the white man. This is by Frantz Fanon, and you'll find that within the Black Skin, White Mask. And is this right what I want? Yeah. And so this prominent existential philosopher, psychologist, psychotherapist, author, in private communication with me, said to me that George Floyd's televised execution was not racially motivated, it was human related. And I think this is one of the struggles where, as I said earlier on, I think it's quite easy to hide within a European existential perspective, which erases the social context, because you can go straight to, in a way, which is similar to color blindness, it's about the human rather about the social within the social world. And I was quite shocked by this. And I decided that actually this particular practitioner wasn't the right person to be my research supervisor. So I ended that relationship after having sleepless nights. So Fanon's quote up there, it talks about often observed between black and white individuals, especially within a framework of historical and systemic racism, the existence and humanity of black individuals are not fully acknowledged or respected. In short, it reeks of inauthenticity, or in other words, a denial. Here's another one, which was back in 2022. And what was really interesting was that the training that we were doing online was working with gender, sexuality, and other differences. And one of my peers, who, there's a 13 of us, and just here, like you see now, I see there's one white male, but I'm a black male. And in all the years that I've been training, I've been more or less the single black male on the course. And I'm sure if I asked you, how many black male therapists do you know? How many black male therapists have you come across on your training? And I suppose the answer, resounding answer, will be actually hardly any. So this peer of mine, who's already an academic and teaches elsewhere, but she was doing a doctorate, she said and wrote online, when I see a black person, particularly a black male on the street, in just a few nanoseconds, my pupils expand. I am more attentive of my surroundings. My muscles tense up, and it does not take a genius to realize that I go into a slight survival mode, because I perceive the other person a predator and a threat. This is 2022 doing a module on working with gender, sexuality, and other differences. And if you recall the clip I played, you can see remnants of that. A predator, a threat. Curiously, if the black man in question is dressed in Western clothing, polished shoes, or a suit, that alertness goes down. That could also be said about, if I speak like you, if I speak and I ingest those values within what we've been training, then I'm less of a threat. I'm less of a threat if I assimilate, integrate, and deny, my own culture, if you like. The presentation that I did on Monday, which is really cool, the theme was the hidden difference. The hidden difference. And for me, it's there in plain sight from what I've been saying. And so I'm going to go through this, and I'm not going to wish for it, but I'm going to speak to some of the slides, and then at the end show you what started to come out of my research. But an interesting one of those, why go on? I don't think anybody kind of got it. And I didn't speak to it properly, but I'll say a little bit more about why go on. So, to my knowledge anyway, and again, it speaks to that there aren't hardly any that, when you look at therapists, counsellors, there aren't that many black males, which again kind of speaks to something that's quite, I suppose, what would I say, plays a big part in the dismal mental health issues that we face within our black community, especially with black males. And so I came across 12 studies that's, use a phenomenological approach, but also it was around black male practitioners or tutors, only 12. And to my knowledge, there isn't any study that's been conducted within the UK. And so Booth conducted a study in 2014 using a phenomenological and feminist ecological perspective. Brief findings was that financial and institution barriers, lack of reputation and cultural competency, which I dislike that word. And I'll tell you why I dislike it. You learning about cultural competency still makes you the standard. It's almost as though it's okay that if I start talking about, well, I've read some policies, I've got some competencies, I can work with. I think check out Fanon and you'll find that actually that's not the case, and many other black authors, activists. So contribute to the shortage of black male clinicians in mental health. Participants emphasised the need for black-owned institution and mentorship opportunities for recruitment and retention. That speaks to me about black-owned institutions. I know some institutions over the years have tried that, but again, there's a standard that one needs to meet. Kennedy used a phenomenological descriptive design, Gouldy's 5-step analysis. What came out of that was black male students often experience microaggressions. Remember the palatable word for racism in college, leading to feelings of discomfort, inferiority, and hypersurveillance. Faculty and staff should take action to create more inclusive environments for these students. None of what I'm speaking about now is new. Absolutely not new. And I know that as a 60-year-old, that was, I was born, I grew here, and what education was like for me. I grew up in a time when, I couldn't enter into buildings and it said no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. I'd be chased down as a young kid by the National Front. Much hasn't changed. It's just changed its shape. Johnson in 2019 used a narrative inquiry to promote diversity and inclusion in counselling. Well, what he found was there was a need to promote diversity and inclusion in counselling. Educators and administrators must deconstruct ingrained oppressive systems. Biases in the admissions process that lead to overrepresentation demographics should be addressed. Henfield et al. Used a cell investigation, and the findings here was African American doctoral students in counselling education programs face challenges such as isolation, cultural misunderstanding, and pressure to conform. What I need to say here is that there was only one black male within this particular study. Yeah, there was one black. They also found that classroom interactions and program orientation affects stress levels, while poor mentoring and lack of respect for differences causes irritation. They also found that faculty should address cultural competence and create inclusive environments for a sense of belonging. Jaimon again used Mustaka's heuristic inquiry. They found creating an inclusive environment requires cultivating relationships with students, fostering a sense of community, and recruiting more black males. They also found that this is important to help students feel safe, supported, and empowered, especially those facing additional challenges. Gurr used Gorgie's 5-step analysis and found that systemic racism prevents black people from achieving financial and social growth. Also stressed that traditional African concepts of counselling and healing are often overlooked in favour of white Eurocentric approaches. And found that black male school counsellors face challenges in a structurally racist system, but their resilience, advocacy, and cultural pride and community building are valuable assets. Cash found using tokenism and Van Maenen's phenomenological analysis that African American male educators face challenge in the education system due to their race and gender, and that societal stereotypes and assumptions about black masculinity and sexuality amongst minority students impact the experiences of black male teachers. School systems should work to attract more black male teachers and establish mechanisms for them to convene and support each other. And Hayden used a phenomenological portraiture and critical race theory and found African American male faculty at a public community college in Pacific Northwest face racism and sexism hindering the academic careers, and that predominantly white institutions need to diversify their faculty and leadership, and white faculty administrators should be educated about the benefits of hiring and promoting African American male faculty. Oops. No, this is more. Smith also used a narrative inquiry with a critical race theory and found that college environments may perpetuate systemic racism and marginalize black males, leading to negative psychological, emotional consequences. This is the racial battle fatigue that I spoke about, that I've experienced. Jason used Van Maenen's approach again. Black men face challenges in counselling profession due to their lack of representation, negative stigma. They found that mentorship is important and that the profession needs to increase diversity to better serve clients from diverse backgrounds. And this post-structuralist theory and gender combined with critical race theory, Allen found that black men on college campuses face racism, microaggression that limit their expression of certain masculinity. Also found that these experiences contribute to moments of racial and gender socialization, and that black men resist dominant narratives through negotiation and subversion. As I was saying, it's hidden in plain sight, and I think, I'm kind of, if you like, You know, there is not one sort of, you know, whether it's conferences, training institutions where I am kind of got someone else that looks like me. But worse still, that someone, and as I said, the proverbial knee is only starting to come off my neck. And that's because I came across authors that enabled me to have voice, that I could identify with what you can. You have all these different authors and, you know, giants whose shoulders we apparently sit on that look like you. The problem with some of these authors is that when they were writing, you know, blatantly, I was either subhuman, non-human, 3/5 human, and some of these authors from Hegel right through to Heidegger, and I since learned about Sartre as well, didn't hold, you know, they didn't hold us within their theorizing, and some of them held very racist views. We know Carl Jung to be one of them. We know Freud to be that. We know Heidegger or Hannah Arendt. And so all these authors that we kind of lean on into held very derogatory views about me and my ancestors. One of the secrets that Europeans discovered early in his story is that culture carries rules for thinking. And if you could impose your culture on your victims, you know, which we're going to come to around canality of knowledge and being, you could limit their creativity of their vision, destroying their ability to act with will and intent and their own interests. How often, I don't know if you're training, not training, you know, when if you pick up a one of those, you know, any philosophical books, how often have you read the author talking about, and a lot of these authors talk about freedom and what it means to be human, and yet there was a whole millions of people that were not free, that was brutalized, if you like, in one way or another. You know, so it says here, every textbook can confirm mainstream philosophy has no room for race as a reality. The writing of classical Euro-American authors are treated simultaneously as canonical, racist, and universal. Debates about personal identity, existential situations, criteria for epistemic justification is not affected by race, and that race has no implication for the characteristic framing. Mills wrote this back in 1998, and there are other authors writing that at the same time. And I suppose we let's go through. Why go on? This is this idea about how is it that I haven't stopped training once this has come to light, that actually, whether it's through me being a black male who inherently it's been imposed that I'm of the hyper personality, hypersexual, hyper predator, hyper masculinity. And again, masculinity isn't about, you know, I think talking about masculinity, whether it's feminists, white feminists, or black feminists who speak with us rather than for us, our voices are not there. So who's speaking for me as a black male? And anytime that I found that I wanted to speak for me as a black male, and black males in general, it gets closed down. But trans can talk for trans, women, feminists can talk for women, but black males, as I said, no. And so there are three problematics, whether one cares to believe it or not. And one of them is the black is a site of unquestioned humanity. The black emerged as a site whose freedom is continuously challenged. Continuously challenged. And the black is a sight without reason. Or worse, a threat to reason. So why this presentation? Why go on? Why have I continued? Let me share something with you. I learned to read and write in my 30s, and my life was, it was pretty dark. Pretty dark. And, you know, and I take a lot of ownership for not learning, but again, I was brought up in a society and a school that was blatantly racist. And so there's those two sides. And also, you know, the first child of a single parent. And again, I'm not talking about some of what that old research about what black males are not there to father their children, because that's also, you know, that myopic view is a lie too, like a lot of what I started to find out. And so this quote really speaks to what I feel, why I go on. The worst borders are the borders that cannot be seen, read or heard or felt on this side of the line. We who live on the other side of the line, that someone traced while thinking of us, but aiming not to think of us anymore. We are the invisible, or as Derek Bell would say, faces at the bottom of the well. The inaudible and the illegible, because of the success of previous revolutions, decided not to include us being black men. If our here is invisible, and now is even more so. So the background, as I said earlier on, you know, what I found was as the knees started to come off of my neck and I started to speak. And, you know, it's only, truth be told, the pushback that I felt once I started to introduce some of these authors that I came across, pushbacks that I received from peers when I did presentations, from tutors in terms of how in their own way try to either shut me down whilst in the group or through their marking. I wanted to, and I found that every time I wrote an essay, that I always had to go through this horrendous experience about, should I just play the game? Should I just play the game? Should I just get through? And a lot of therapists that I've spoken to, non-white, they've you know, what they've said is they've played the game in order to get through, and then they've had to go out and retrain, if you like, because the training was insufficient. And so the most tolerated black person is the one who is either in his place, working as a janitor or the service person, or is vouched for by, you know, well-meaning, good white people in good standing. Such a black person is less likely to challenge the perceived racial order of a typical white setting. So why this research? I think probably I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have, the only reason I think, if you've done a doctorate, you've done a master's, I think you have to be passionate about the topic. You have to, for me, I had to be passionate about the topic. Had I not come across these authors, as I said, I don't think I'm the type of person that could have remained silent. I don't think I'm the kind of person that would not have some way. And like I said, these authors gave me a voice. They gave me a way of, here it goes. I loved Gordon's idea for moving from black with a small b to black with a capital B. That's why I'm able to do this now. Even some of the material, what I'm showing you now, Why isn't it easy for me? I suppose that's a really good question. So black people, for example, have been racialized downwards since slavery. Although we try to erase that by using these interesting terms, and they keep changing from, it's about diversity or intersectionality or, colorblind. The structures stay in place. And so what I came to find out is that I was able to go on because I found these authors, and I continuously find these authors that are able for me to be seen, for me to see myself, and for me not to feel like I've erased myself, if you like. So they've fought hard to produce and express counter ideologies and narratives on race. And so we come to, it's really interesting because when I came across existentialism, it was really, you could say it was periphery to the dominant models of training, psychoanalytical theory or psychodynamic, person-centered, and what was the other one? CBT. And it was when I found existentialism, the European modality. I couldn't even say phenomenology, and I still can't say it properly, or existential. I didn't know what it meant, but something felt different from what I was being taught. But when I started this 4 or 5 years ago, I was really, first and foremost, it was like a blow. Oh my God. Even within European existentialism, that idea that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, it's there as well. And it made sense. And so for me, I had to somehow find a way of understanding what was going on and the method that I needed to use in order to really give my participants voice and give me voice at the same time. And so Gordon talks about disciplinary decadence, which is the process of critical decay within a field or discipline. In such instances, the proponents, i.e. the existentialist or the person-centered or whatever modality that is they become quite sectarian with their methods. And if you are within and you're training as an existentialist and you go outside of that, and I'd also say if you start to speak in a different way, then you're not being existentialist enough, which leads to a decadent scientist criticizing, as it says here, the humanities for not being scientific. One of the interesting things is that kind of thought takes refuge in the center and ends up by thinking it too, not only to be the only reality. Outside its frontiers are non-being, nothing, barbarity, and nonsense. Being is the very foundation of the system, the totality of these, of the sense of a culture, the macro world of the man or woman of the center. Same thing. This is how it becomes decadent. This is how it becomes closed off. And so what was interesting is, as I was going through, is that initially I chose the SEA, and some things sort of happened, and I thought no. And every method that we were taught in terms of research methods is still grounded in a Eurocentric lens. And I say again, that does not give complete voice to non-whites. And so I chose IPA. And when I conducted my pilot study, I realized then even more so that something was still amiss. And I wasn't able to really speak to my participants' experiences. And I found this quote, which I missed it. and Smith et al. Actually says it within this quote. While IPA's primary purpose may lie elsewhere with understanding and experience, it is never inevitably always enmeshed with a language and a culture. And so the problem of culture and phenomenology, as Henry says here, in part been concealed by the ways in which reason and culture have been brought together in the identity of European phenomenology. So what I did, as I was saying earlier on, is I used the IPA. However, I only used it for its methodological steps. I didn't do my analysis through IPA within this ongoing study here. I just used it for the steps. And so thinking about this classical phenomenology and contemporary phenomenologies, what would it take for phenomenology to become critical, not only of the naive assumption that the world exists apart from consciousness, but also the naive assumption that one could give a rigorous account of consciousness without addressing the contingent social structures that normalize and naturalize power relations in any given world. For instance, like structures like patriarchy, white supremacy, heteronormativity, normativity that permit, organize, and reproduce the natural attitude in ways that go beyond any particular object or form. These are not things to be seen, but rather ways of seeing, and even ways of making the world that go unnoticed without a sustained practice of critical reflection. As I said earlier on, these 12 studies that I came across, and again, I don't think it's been conducted here, which would make sense because there ain't that many black males coming through, and then the barriers that's put before us does not get us to the place where, whether we're doing a diploma, whether it's a BA or postgrad, and worse still, a doctorate course. So, as I said, what is already known about the methods and the topics and the variant phenomenology, which has its limitations and its inappropriateness for studying people of, I'm going to say, Black African heritage without addressing colonialism and slavery. So if the lion does not tell his own story, the hunter will. And this is, for me, has been continually being the case. And so my research question, as I said earlier on, is what is the experience of Black British-born males of African heritage navigating psychotherapy training within a white-dominated culture? And the clinical relevance is, I'm going to go to my notes, although it's written up there. I should have followed my notes. To enable a culturally responsive training based on the findings of my study, to address the dismal disparities in mental health in Black communities, specifically Black males, to promote and encourage decolonizing knowledge production, to address the underrepresentation of Black male therapists. It's also a response to societal movements and debates such as Roads Must Fall, decolonizing the curriculum and methods, and why isn't my professor Black? And to create more supportive, culturally responsive supervisors, including research supervisors, therapists, and lecturers. So the methodology, data collection, and the ACR, which is an Africana critical race decolonial lens, and my data analysis. One of the interesting things I found, and I see that with websites, it's very white. And even within research papers, the names, the pseudonyms given, again, one might think that it's, there's a difference, but I think there's a big difference in what I'm trying to do. Yeah, and so Names hold symbolic meanings. Names make or mar a person. Scholars have highlighted the systemic policy of Westerners was to deny Black Africans our heritage by hiding, I say hiding, stealing and denigrating our culture and history. In some small way of reclaiming my own and the courageous participants' humanity, I have chosen pseudonyms for myself and for my participants as a statement of intent. So I conducted semi-structured interviews which was conducted online over the lockdown period of social distancing. And you know, all the protocols were followed. And so we come to a Africana critical race framework, which for me is a decolonial term. So Africana phenomenology doesn't reflect on rationality, reason, in a cold analytical way like European phenomenology. Instead, it focuses on how racism has dehumanized Africans and created harmful stereotypes, aiming to expose the faulty foundations of the European humanities and social sciences that have supported such racist ideas. A decolonial term values the insight of oppressed and colonized peoples, aiming to broaden thinking and bridge gaps between different areas of knowledge through a critical analysis of blending systems. And so the free insights that is part of this, as I was saying, sorry, I opened up another one. So it's a perspective that involves an epistemic shift that brings into view what's often concealed, dissecting the mechanisms that perpetuate this concealment or distortion. I've started to touch on that, and I think it's the theories and what's embedded in these theories and ideologies that we have. And so a ACR framework draws on and works through each other is an Africana existentialism approach, which highlights the personal and psychological experiences of individuals of Black African descent, offering insight to their existential challenges in a racially stratified world. It also draws on the coloniality of power, which illuminates the enduring impact of colonialism on power structures, knowledge production, and cultural paradigms, revealing how these legacies continue to perpetuate social inequalities. And also critical race theory, which examines systemic racism within legal, societal contexts, shedding light on how institutional structures and policies contribute to racial disparities and reinforcing the need for transformative change. So as I said earlier on, many existing studies use phenomenology, but often overlook systemic power dynamics and historical context of colonialism when exploring the experiences of colonized individuals. To address this gap and gain a deeper perspective, my studies adopt the ACR framework, which recognizes the enduring influence of race, colonialism on these experiences. My study's primary goals is to amplify the voices of Black British-born males of African heritage, offering a much more nuanced understanding. And so here's the steps. There's 7 in total, but I've got 6 down here. And I just want to show you something. So ACR. So what I said earlier on is that I've had to immerse myself in, I wanted to immerse myself in authors' writings that looked like me, or at least enabled me to have a voice, a closer voice to my experiencing. And so when I'm going through this reading and rereading, obviously I've immersed myself. I cannot deny that, and one cannot bracket that this is what's influencing how I see, how I encounter I suppose, which again, the hermeneutics of how is my client understanding, or how do I understand my participant understanding their experiences, and how am I experiencing? And I don't no longer have to do that through a white lens. because I've immersed myself in authors that weren't provided to me. And so ACR, that's how I'm looking through that. Using the same 7 steps that IPA has provided. And so, let me just go back. I think that's a nice picture. So this is some of the process which I'm sure some of you have gone through, following the IPAs, how you go through. The transcripts are within that plastic there. And then I've extracted the notes that I've taken from that, and here they are here. I've thrown them about, scattered them, and then started to read them and put them into to groups, and then began to name them. This is some of the PETs, which is personal experience, experiential themes, and then there's the sub themes. So that's them there, and there's the sub themes. There's so many of them, and this is them just grouping about me about to start reading, and again naming them. Oops, I must stop that. So what's the difference? Just to give you a flavour of an IPA interpretation or analysis and an ACR. And sometimes it's very slight. So let me just read the transcript because it's quite small and I've got it written down here. So the transcript, my participant says, I felt that I wasn't allowed to. I felt my very presence alone made other people uncomfortable. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time. I couldn't put my finger on it. And because when we look at the field, there aren't many people that look like me in that psychoanalytical kind of field. And that's difficult. That's a difficulty that I had at that time. I spent many years in therapy. I must have been in psychoanalysis for 10 years. I was going 2-3 times a week for 10 years, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week. The whole idea of regarding my blackness was never fully understood. That the black experience, whether or not people like it or not, it's different. And so, and again, anybody, each individual using any of these lenses, IPA or ACR, will not give them exact what it's about. We come to it differently. And so one interpretation through IPA could be navigating the psychoanalytical field. He grapples with a deep sense of isolation, feeling his mere presence was unsettling to white others, underscoring the stark absence of individuals with similar backgrounds. From an ACR perspective, despite his long engagement with psychoanalysis, the overshadowing whiteness of the field left him feeling alienated, underscoring the field's failure to genuinely grapple with the nuances of black experiences. One other, again, to give you a flavour, have I put it down? Yes, I have. So another past participant says, it would have resounded more. I would have had more resonance for a person that talks it and lived it and understands it and can be it. How do you teach something so personal? Okay, you have knowledge, but there's also action. For example, I know what it's like to have menstrual every month because you got a certain amount of crampings. That's great. You are very knowledgeable, but you cannot teach me as a woman how to feel to be a woman. A module on me, a module on people like me, a whole section of the journey of maybe otherness would have been really good to know more about. Let's say someone like Dr. Joy DeGury, going back to slavery and understanding systemic racism, i.e. in the room. What does that look like? And so an IPA could be, said, a deeper exploration into the historical and systemic challenges faced by Black individuals, particularly from an African heritage, would have enriched and validated this training experience. From an ACR perspective, a comprehensive module on the lived experiences of Black males, tracing the roots from slavery to systemic racism, would have bridged the gap between abstract learning and authentic understanding. And I think one of the difficulties is that being seen. Here is a Black male speaking about his experience, sharing it, but yet over here that is left out. And I find that quite often. it's either that it's left out, or they group me in with what it means to have masculinity, like with white males. And we know black males don't have that power. It's not that. And so here are some of the, in terms of how it links to African existentialism, the colonial matrix of power, critical race theory. So here are some words that came up and has continued to come up. So the Eurocentric curriculum, their experiences with in supervisory relationships, personal therapy experiences, interaction with peers and clients' work. And as an example, Talib, and I'm going to change his name because I've since realized that actually a lot what gets left out is that some of these names are Afro-Asian, and the Arabs started out slavery, and, because they're darker skin, they were able to kind of overthrow and then enslave Black people of African descent. And so these names, I'm going to do is that I'm going to find out the real African names and the meanings of that and change all these names. And so a Eurocentric curriculum, within terms of African links to African existentialism, exploration of identity in a dominant culture, or colonial matrix of power, Eurocentrism as a colonial legacy in education, or the systemic racial biases in the curriculum. Research supervisor not having lived experience of a Black person. And here, within African existentialism, the intersection of personal experiences of professional development, or within CMP, the dynamics of academic guidance and again racial dynamics in mentorship. So that's just to give you a flavor of it. And so Zubri, a cognitive behavioral therapist, and this was something else that I found within the American studies, they don't actually say what methodology these counselors have. They just call them practitioners or counselors, but I think it's important so that I can trace back, so for instance, Watson in behavioralism, he was, I think he was one of the forerunners or within the eugenics, and he felt that Black people were unteachable, if you like, that we were backward. So again, I think it's important to see what methodologies these men are being taught within. And so one of the group themes, group existential themes that I've come up with at the moment is being Black and male in white spaces. So Zubri talks about an experience with his supervisor where he says, "She was my supervisor, my clinical supervisor. I think she was speaking about me, but nonetheless, she spoke the language. She used the N-word, being hung by a tree, and not wanting to be like that. I should watch myself, or otherwise that could or would happen. I mean, she was very complicated. She was one of the biggest reasons why I left the course so early. Ultimately, she was a problem. It was a problem. I didn't fit." Here's an interesting thing. I think this supervisor was a brown woman from Indian heritage, but trained within a white culture with white values that had imbued somewhere along the line these ideas. So what I want to say, which I said about the peer that used those words about a predator and a threat, this isn't, we don't take racism into the institution in our lunch bags. It's part of the fabric. It's part of society. And for her to use the word, the N-word, I think there was something about that experience of him being a Black male. I've seen the transcript, and what she thought about him. So Babatunde says it brought up a variety of feelings. Sometimes there was a sense of, it's my responsibility to help them understand both my student peers and the trainers, to help them understand the perspective of a Black person, the Black mind. Sometimes that was upsetting because I felt a resistance to wanting to learn it. And other times there was more of an open willingness and a desire coming from them to please say more, please teach. Jelani says, I'm working class and all my friends are working class, and a lot of people on these courses, on the courses that I'm with, are either doing it. There's a lot of people in retirement, a lot of them middle class. I've got a person who was a major in the army, really. Another person whose parents are both psychologists. Another one who was a diplomat at the age of 12. These people are sort of, people from another country were doing it. And one person's parents were both psychotherapists. So the majority of people I'm working with, meaning on this course with, I'm training with, are well-to-do middle class. Femi says he didn't get it. It's not that he didn't want to get it. It was beyond his understanding. Remember, I'm not the norm. I'm not the normal person that will come into analysis. He also says, we did a weekend seminar on class, and then that was the turning point for me, where it was quite clear that my peers were staunchly middle class. They frowned upon the two women who were facilitating that weekend, who were working class, but had to do their training in academia, transcended into a middle class position. And my peers attacked them, both professionally and personally. And then there was this underlying theme about working class students not fully understanding the analytical responses and theories. And it just kind of highlighted to me at that time, maybe I'm in the wrong place. And I think we know that Freud said that only people who were highly educated and middle class were analyzable. I think we know that. And Jelani says, my training, to be honest, didn't really, did it? It trained you to work with white clients, but it didn't train you to work with various clients. It was slight. That's what I'm saying. It was really, there was the slightest bit on diversity. I created my own part on that diversity. And so we come to the end, and this quote kind of speaks to about, I suppose, none of us, as I said before, has escaped colonialism. We breathe it. It's baked into the systems. And so this fear of Black consciousness, the colonial mind performs acts from the imposed singular that's been universalized globally. The Euro-American understanding of what it means to be human and face human dilemmas, that's embedded within our theories. The colonized mind performs and acts from the imposed singular individualistic perspective whilst erasing the wider contexts of living within an anti-Black world. Rather than seeking to use the master's tools, Audre Lorde, for social justice and moving beyond the imposition, it speaks to the comfort of not disrupting clinality of knowledge and being. And so following Bonilla Silva and many other non-white authors, it appears that while the persistence of racial issues continues, there are many inauthentic claims and attempts to make race disappear, such as through the promotion of meritocracy, class distinctions, a proliferation in EDI events, working within diversity, social justice talks, books and articles being written, some even using the word for the first time in their careers, only since the televised execution of George Floyd in 2020. This reflects not only interest conversion, but carnality of knowledge and being. Academia is often seen as a space, particularly in the UK, where white middle-class individuals tend to dominate, potentially perpetuating racial biases, knowingly or unknowingly. This enduring legacy, forged by colonial racism, despite the passage of time, is ingrained in the system and remains largely unchanged. So can I just read this last bit? To quote Fanon, in contemporary academic discourse, the colonial university is analogized to a world historically cut in two, a division that underscores the disparity between the dominant white Euro-American perspective and all other cultural identities, reminiscent of the abyssal line of colonial times. Within this framework, the pivotal roles played by barracks and the police and the administrators, colonial administrators that is, are now metaphorically filled by university administrators, tutors, lecturers, research supervisors. These figures not only control the curriculum, but also construct the archetype of the good student, predominantly in their own image, thereby implicitly dictating who is granted access and who is systematically excluded from the academia narrative and beyond.